name is Charmaine, and I'm the dietitian that helps people reverse type 2 diabetes with plant-based eating. And today I have Galia with me.
Hi, everyone.
Awesome. I am super excited about our podcast episode today because we are going to dive deep into a study that is a ketogenic study, a long-term ketogenic study, and I am super excited about it. Galia, can you tell us a little bit more about the study?
Yeah, so we've kind of picked this one because it looks at a couple of different studies, and that's always good because we don't want to just look at findings from one study and say, those findings are absolute, let's share those. But it's really important to kind of look at different studies and see what the general findings are within those studies. So this study looks at the ketogenic diet, which, as everyone knows in the diabetic community, is extremely, extremely popular. And so these studies look at the benefits and the risks of ketogenic diets. And I think it's really important for us to kind of go over this with you all, because a lot of the time we hear about those benefits, but we don't necessarily hear about those risks. And naturally, whenever you are going to adopt something as serious as a new diet, right? That's what you're putting into your body. You want to be aware of the risks that are present. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Hopefully it's going to be a nice, concise, compact episode to give you the breakdown on what benefits you could expect on a ketogenic diet, but what those risks also are.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Galia. Yeah, just confession time, I have totally tried a ketogenic diet before, and I know that it's super hard to maintain. And even though there are short-term benefits of weight loss, I know this is something that is very hard to maintain. And I've had experience with hundreds of people coming from ketogenic diet and telling me that, yes, they lost weight, yes, their blood sugar went down, but their cholesterol went up, or, their body becomes really resistant against carbohydrates. And so I am very excited to dig deep into this study to be able to, look at both the benefits and risks of the study. Galia, do you mind pulling the study up and giving us a short description of what the study is about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the study aims to basically investigate the effects of the ketogenic diet on different health conditions. So the health conditions that most commonly adopt, people with those health conditions, right, that most commonly adopt the ketogenic diet. So like I said, we hear a lot about those benefits when a person kind of takes on a ketogenic diet, but not really the long-term effects or the risks that are associated with a ketogenic diet. So that's what this study is about. So I think it'll be good, again, to just kind of touch on what the ketogenic diet is like by definition, just in case anyone here isn't, fully aware or doesn't really understand what the definition of a ketogenic diet is. So Charmaine, I don't know if you want to take that on.
Yeah, so basically a ketogenic diet is a diet that is higher in fat. And so what happens usually with a ketogenic diet is it pushes your body, because it's very low in carbs and it's very high in fat, it pushes your body into a ketosis state where your body, instead of using glucose, starts using ketones as energy. And ketones comes from fat. And so it's very attractive to a lot of people because it improves, or it speeds up the fat burn, so quote unquote fat burn, right? Because your body mainly uses ketones. And so people are able to see extreme weight loss and the very fast fat loss in this diet. And so that's what a ketogenic diet usually is. It can range from different ratios, from 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratios, basically mentioning that it's 4-to-1 ratio of, I believe, fat and protein. And that usually helps your body, pushes it more into a ketogenic state. And so that's what the usually ketogenic diet is. And it's usually consists of a lot of animal protein. And I know there's some versions of the ketogenic diet that is a little bit more plant-based. They'll add more like nuts and seeds and oil and a little bit more of the non-starchy vegetables. But most of the time it is a very high animal protein diet that is high in both saturated fat and just total fat in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that is the perfect kind of segue into what the effect of a ketogenic diet has on the body in terms of the quality of the foods that you're eating, right? So one of the first things to note, like Charmaine said, is that a ketogenic diet is typically a low carb diet or a very low carb diet. What this study is essentially pulling on is that very low carb diets or low carb diets, they tend to be not very rich in minerals, in vitamins, in fiber, which, comes from plants, and phytochemicals as well, which, are really, really important to our healthy functioning metabolism. So ketogenic diet, not very rich in those nutrients, especially when you compare it to a plant-based diet. And that's something really important to draw comparison on. And a lot of the time throughout these studies, a plant-based diet is kind of the reference point, as it's the point of comparison that we pull on. So like Charmaine said, the kind of 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, that's one of the most popular forms of the ketogenic diet, and it refers to the ratio in terms of grams that you're getting from fats and protein combined and carbohydrates. So what the study is essentially pulling on is that many studies kind of report that people will suffer with certain micronutrient deficiencies when they are on a ketogenic diet, because that diet is so high in animal protein and fats, right? And it's very devoid of those plant-based foods, of those healthy carbohydrates, right? We're not talking about processed carbs here. We're talking about fruits. We're talking about vegetables. We're talking about whole grains. And those are really the foods that are going to be the most dense in those nutrients that we're looking for. Charmaine, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, it like that you drew on the fact that plant-based foods are more nutrient dense. So for those of you who don't know what nutrient dense means that the more nutrient dense a food is, means that it has less calories but carries more nutrients. A less nutrient dense foods means that it has more calories and carry less nutrients, and it can include minerals, vitamins, phytonutrients. And so that's what nutrient dense means. That's why with the plant-based diet, most of these foods are very low in calorie density, but they're very high in their nutritional content. That's why these foods are very nutritionally dense. And when you think about animal protein or oil or butter or fat, they're very, very, very high in calories, but comparatively, they are lower in nutrients compared to plant-based foods. And so I think that's where the problematic side comes in, other than the weight loss or lowering blood sugar benefits that you see, the problem with ketogenic diet or any low carb diet is because you rely on less nutrient dense foods. And especially if you're really on a strict ketogenic diet, you most often have to limit your vegetable intake, even if it's non-starchy vegetable, because a cup of broccoli may even have like 5 grams of carbohydrate. And I know a lot of people who are really strict, they try to even limit the amount of non-starchy vegetable as well. So that's where the problem can come in and cause different health issues, not including nutrient deficiency and also fiber deficiency as well.
Yeah, so thank you for elaborating on it. And so the point that you just touched on fiber. So if you haven't listened to our episode on fiber, you should go and listen to it before we touch on this. But like Charmaine said, ketogenic diets are typically quite low in fiber because people do end up staying clear of a lot of those vegetables that are going to be really fiber rich, and those whole grains as well. So like I said, if you want to know more about fiber, about what fiber does for you, definitely go listen to I think it's our previous episode. I might be wrong, but definitely go listen to it because you will take a lot from it. And it's a fun episode, I think. But yeah, so when we're talking about the general effect on dietary quality when it comes to the ketogenic, it's really those kind of, I think, 3 points that we're touching on. So struggling with those nutrient deficiencies, it being a diet that's low in fiber, and that fiber is really, really important to many kind of facets of general health. And then most importantly, the ketogenic diet is a high fat diet. It's going to be high in saturated fat. It's going to be high in cholesterol in a lot of instances. And you see a rise in cholesterol in a lot of shifts onto a ketogenic diet. So those are 3 points when we're talking about the dietary quality on a ketogenic diet. And those 3 points are really going to tie into the risk element when we're talking about the long-term use of a ketogenic diet, whether it it be for trying to lose weight or trying to improve your blood sugars, if that's something that you think is going to help you, you know, those 3 points are really, really going to play into that. So I think we could move on to the effect of the ketogenic diet on individuals who are struggling with their weight, right? So if you're overweight, a lot of the time, you know, people will try a ketogenic diet to lose weight, and that is the benefit that we're talking about, right? So that risk reward, the reward that people see with the ketogenic diet is that they're able to lose weight relatively quickly. But, you know, that's not the only thing that we want to take on board when we're trying to decide if that is the diet for us. So Charmaine, I don't know if you want to talk a little about the downfalls of the keto diet in terms of, you know, weight loss and health in general?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I want to mention about just weight loss and health in general, I think it's the sustainability of the ketogenic diet. I cannot tell you how many times, you know, people have told me when they go on a low carb diet, like they have intense carb cravings. And I feel like that is the biggest downfall when it comes to weight loss, because when we think about weight loss, when we think about general health, we don't want to only do this for a few months, right? Like we don't want to just be skinny for a few months, for lack of better word, right? I like to use this analogy a lot when I talk to people about changing your lifestyle, right? It's just like building a house, right? When you build a house, you want the house to last for a lifetime or even 2-3 lifetimes, right? You don't want the house to last for like a few months, right? That would be really bad. So the whole process of changing your lifestyle, it's almost like building a house. And so when you think about ketogenic lifestyle, I have not met a lot of people that can maintain it for a long time because it is not sustainable. Like I personally, like I said, I've tried a ketogenic diet and I remember I dreamt of eating bread. Like I literally dreamt of eating bread. And I dreamt of like eating rice, which is so bizarre, but that is what happens to you. And naturally, a lot of times your body do gravitate towards carbohydrate because your body do, you know, usually run on carbohydrates. And so that's, I would say, it's the biggest downfall. And a lot of times when people go back on a normal lifestyle, right, like that is not low carb, they immediately shoot up their weight back in. And I've heard so many people tell me that they have actually, you know, increased their weight than before they went on this keto diet, because, you know, they first ruined their relationship with food, and second, you know, they gained all the way back because this deprivation actually made them eat more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And I've tried a almost keto diet because I couldn't do it, and it was just not successful for me. But I don't want you guys to take our word for it, like anecdotally. So referring into this study that we're looking at today, right? So they've pulled 38 studies on ketogenic diets in people. And so those studies range between 6 to 12 months, including 6,500 people. That's a lot of people who have trialed this. And what they found was that the weight loss that people experienced on the keto diet when compared to the plant-based diet was only slightly higher. And when you actually try to pull a statistical significance, it's not there, right? So they're saying that statistically, right, the weight loss that you can experience on a ketogenic diet, you can also have on a plant-based diet. Pulling into that as well, these studies are only 6 to 12 months. It's almost, I have not been able to find a study that looks at the ketogenic diet, for longer than 12 months. And that really says something, because you can find long-term studies on almost every other diet. It's doable. People can do it, but people seem to really struggle with maintaining a ketogenic diet for longer than 12 months. And that tells you something, right? You don't want to make a lifestyle change, get all this progress, and then after 12 months, you can't do it anymore. And what? So you backtrack on the progress that you made? I think that's something that's really, really interesting to think about. And then another thing from this study that we're looking at today pulls on that weight loss that people see in when they take on that keto diet, right? And so, you know, not all weight loss is equal, right? When we're talking about weight loss, we actually want it to be fat mass that we're losing, right? We want to decrease the amount of adipose tissue. We don't want to, when people go onto a ketogenic diet, they're not actually necessarily losing that fat mass, at least initially. What they're really losing is glycogen stores and water. So it's like your body is deflating of those energy reserves that you need and dehydrating when you think about it. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to add to that. I just think that's mind-boggling to me. Like,
yeah, you probably often hear people say that when they went on a keto diet, they lost 20 pounds in 1 week. And that sounds crazy, right? But a lot of times why the weight loss is so fast, because a lot of it is water weight. Carbohydrates itself, each gram of carbohydrates holds 4 grams of water. And so so when you cut out carbohydrates, that already, makes your body not hold any water, right? Not any extra water, which sounds great, right? Because you don't want the water weight. But the thing about water weight is you only hold water weight because you're dehydrated. So anyways, that has a side note, or a bonus for you guys. But you have to understand that a lot of times when it comes to fast weight loss, a lot of it is water weight and glycogen that you're losing, right? And not your body usually have an energy deficit of, I think, 3,500 calories to lose 1 pound of fat. And so a lot of times people have this image, oh my gosh, like I'm losing so much weight. It's probably water. Even if you feel like you're closer loser, it's probably water that you're losing and not necessarily fat. So I think, like you said, a lot of times you don't want to lose those energy reserves or water because those are good things, right? You really want to lose fat. And talking about fat, I would like to touch upon the fact that with insulin resistance, which is what we often focus on, people feel like, okay, well, if I'm losing fat here with this ketogenic diet, I must be reversing my insulin resistance, right? But most of the time, and even in the study, it mentioned that it's not necessarily with insulin resistance, it's not necessarily that you're just losing fat cells, right? The fat can also be in your liver, it could be in muscle cells. So it's not just about losing weight that will automatically help you be less insulin resistant. And I've helped a lot of people that have already lost weight but are still insulin resistant reverse their insulin resistance by actually eating a low fat, high carb plant-based diet that can actually help them reverse the insulin resistance. Do you want to add upon that?
Yes, no. So I was just thinking about that, and I was going to make the point that you were saying, about that just losing adipose tissue is not enough to tackle insulin resistance, because fat can be stored in multiple areas in the body. And so you still want to target those tissues. And the only way to address the fat in those tissues is to work on tackling that baseline insulin resistance, which is, what we really focus on. But I think tying it back to the ketogenic diet in individuals who are struggling with their weight, I think it's really interesting when you look into, a lot of that weight loss that people kind of promote about when they start on a ketogenic diet, because it is tied to the loss of those glycogen stores from not eating carbs, and then following suit, losing that water, right? That is that point, that kind of occurrence of losing that weight in that way. It's one of the biggest points that people use against the ketogenic diet, right? Because the benefit of the keto diet, if you're overweight, is, oh, it helped me lose weight, right? But when you think about what weight you're losing, right, what are the negative sides of the ketogenic diet? It's a high fat diet, and that cholesterol, that saturated fat, is a risk factor for heart disease. So you really have to take that on board before you go forward with something like that and think, is that short-term fat loss that is reported to come back because it's not a high compliance diet, right? We've already established people struggle to stay on a ketogenic diet for more than 12 months. So when they go back to eating, normally their carbohydrate tolerance is lower because they haven't been eating carbs. When they do eat carbs, it's a bit of a mess to say in simple terms. And you've increased your risk factor, Mm-hmm. So I think that's something really important to kind of pull on as well. Charmaine, I don't know if you want to add on that or elaborate.
Yeah, if you can scroll down to the diabetes part with the article, if you can scroll down to the diabetes part, I think one thing that is really interesting about the type 2 diabetes, because this is like a meta-analysis, so it takes in a lot of different studies. And so this part where it says, yes, you can, and a lot of times people in the diabetes world are very drawn to ketogenic diet because it lowers your HbA1c, it lowers your glucose level, right? Because you're not eating carbs, and that makes so much sense, right? Because you're not eating carbs, of course, like you're not increasing your blood glucose, right? Even though sometimes it does with some diets, even if it's low carb, it still can't really bring your blood sugar down. But anyways, most of the time you do see a decrease in HbA1c, right? And some reports do show that you can improve insulin sensitivity, but it's dependent on the loss of fat mass, right? But even like we said, even with fat mass, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are are improving your insulin resistance. And I really like this study because it does, it's not one-sided, right? It does say that, okay, like in some cases it do improve insulin sensitivity, but only but it's more so dependent on the fat mass, if that makes sense. And I think one thing that is really interesting is that when it talks about the study where 17 overweight or obese men were provided a baseline diet, 50% carbohydrates for 4 weeks, and a ketogenic diet, 5% carbohydrate for 4 weeks during the ketogenic phase, total cholesterol, low density protein cholesterol, and C-reactive protein increased significantly, while fasting insulin and triglycerides decreased, right? So of course that happens with, fasting insulin, of course it decreases, but the crazy thing is that it talks about how the total cholesterol and the LDL actually increased, and the C-reactive protein also increased. So the C-reactive protein, if those of you who don't know, it actually increased when your body is under stress or when it's under like inflammation or some kind of like acute stress. That's when your C-reactive protein actually increases. And so it's actually not a good thing that your C-reactive protein increases. So I think it's interesting that, when you're in a ketogenic phase, all of these flags, go up, and it's actually definitely concerning because we definitely don't want the cholesterol to go up, of course, and also the inflammation, we definitely don't want it to go up. And so I think these are problematic things of a ketogenic diet because it helps with one area, but it doesn't really help with other areas, right? And so I would say for some people, yes, it may help them lose weight, but it's definitely not the optimal diet, given that there's other things that can impair your health with the nutrient deficiency, fiber deficiency, and also these, inflammation markers and cholesterol as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think what's also interesting about this particular study, in the article here, is this element at the end of the paragraph, right? So like, while on the ketogenic diet, insulin sensitivity was impaired in those participants. So when they were given a baseline diet of 50% carbohydrates up from the 5% carbohydrates on the ketogenic diet, they're not able to process those nutrients, right? So it's telling you that the ketogenic diet is negatively impacting insulin sensitivity, your ability to process those carbs, right? So if it's not a long-term change, if it's not a long-term solution, you're essentially negatively impacting your ability to process these foods, right? And I pose the question to anyone who's listening, if you have tried a ketogenic diet, and I've seen this with myself, as someone with type 1 diabetes, when you're on a high fat diet and you're avoiding carbs, the moment that you have even a tiny little bit of carbs, your blood sugars just do an absolute madness, and you see the numbers skyrocket, and you're like, how is that possible? This is how it's possible. That's the explanation there. Okay, cool. So moving forward, so we, as we were saying, one of the benefits that people experience when they adopt the ketogenic diet and they are struggling with type 2 diabetes is that they see their A1C go down. But according to this study, they have looked at multiple different research studies and found that positive effect on reducing your A1C actually wanes over time. So it's only an initial reduction in A1C. That is not to say that it will be sustained or that it will continue to decrease. It can actually come back up over time, especially if it's not a diet that has a high compliance rate or high level of sustainability. I think that's really, really interesting. And you see that anecdotally a lot. I know, Charmaine, that you've spoken to people who have been like, initially on keto, I was able to get my numbers down and my A1C came down, but then they slowly started creeping back up. And, that's why I'm ready to try something new, because that didn't work. And I think that's really, really interesting because, like we said, a lot of the time we focus on those short-term benefits and not what is actually going to happen in the long term, or the long-term risks that you might face when taking this on.
Yeah. And I do talk to a lot of people who say, I just want to eat fruits, I just want to eat fruits and not have it spike my blood sugar. And it saddens me because I feel like this culture that we're in like tells us that if you have diabetes, you can't have fruits, right? Like you can't have these high sugary foods, right? But I think a lot of times we forget, okay, what happens if we don't eat carbohydrates? Our body is not used to processing carbohydrates, right? That's why these people that were on a ketogenic diet, when they are back onto a slightly higher carbohydrate diet, their insulin sensitivity is just not there. They have impaired glucose tolerance. So it's definitely something that is really important for us to address. And so what's really, exciting is this part that I'm looking at. I think it's like the light of the tunnel that we see with the message or the study that's done by Hall et al. 2021, which is like pretty recent. Would you like to share a little bit on that, Galia, with that study that compares the animal-based ketogenic diet and a plant-based low-fat diet?
Yeah, so I'm just having a look through, sorry.
You're good.
Oh yeah, so this is really, really interesting. So it's essentially looking to compare, a ketogenic diet with a low-fat plant-based diet, which is the diet that we kind of recommend, right? That we are very strong advocates for. So they're comparing these two diets, and they are looking at the postprandial glucose in people on these diets, right? So your blood sugar after a meal. And what they found was that individuals so a glucose tolerance test. So for those that don't know, a glucose tolerance test is essentially they will give you a solution that is like sugary, a liquid, and they will see the way that your body kind of responds to that and see how your blood sugars, come up or come down. So they saw that people who were in the ketogenic diet, that they had a kind of stunted oral glucose tolerance, that they were not able to effectively process that, as to say that their blood sugar response was a lot more kind of aggressive, more aggravated. So their average 2-hour blood glucose was 142 compared to the plant-based group where they were 108. So that is quite a big difference, right? And like Charmaine had mentioned before, the ketogenic group had a very high C-reactive protein marker as well, which is a marker of inflammation and, like Charmaine said, acute stress. So I think this is really, really interesting because it tells you on multiple kind of facets what is happening in your body in comparison on those two diets. Like we mentioned before, the kind of effects that people see with their A1C as well. So being able to bring down your A1C, that is not a sustained trend on a ketogenic diet. People aren't really able to continue to bring down their A1C. And because the ketogenic diet isn't really well studied after 12 months, it's really difficult to see what happens with a person's A1C after that time period where it's typically investigated. Charmaine, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think just to kind of put things into perspective, when you think about reversing diabetes, and I know, with reversing diabetes, it's like a common term used in the keto world too. They, feel like they're reversing their diabetes when they lowered their A1C, right? Well, as the study shows, like that's not really the case. Once you lower A1C, yes, your A1C is lowered, but your glucose tolerance is impaired, right? Your carbohydrate tolerance is impaired, right? So I think it begs the question, okay, does lowering A1C really mean that you're reversing your diabetes? Probably not. Like I would actually call someone reversing their diabetes if they're able to lower A1C and be able to eat more carbohydrates and still be able to have a normal blood sugar. Then I would really call that reversing diabetes. So I just wanted to tie that in and to really give you perspective. Okay, what is really reversing diabetes when in this world of confusion in the diet world, if that makes sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting. This article is really focusing on the risks associated with the ketogenic diet as well as the benefits, right? And if the risks or the benefits outweigh each other, right? And this article takes the standpoint that the risks of the ketogenic diet actually outweighs the benefit, because the only benefit that is established is that initial decrease in A1C, right, which is not sustained, right? We've said that it's been studied to wane over time or come back up. The initial weight loss, which for the most part is the loss of glycogen and water, not actually adipose tissue, adipose mass, which is the weight that you would want to be losing, if you're trying to reverse, increase your insulin sensitivity on one side and also improve your BMI. So I think that's really, really interesting because those are the benefits, but the risks that you have, it doesn't have a long-term tolerability. It's not sustainable for most people. Those low-carb diets, very low-carb diets, the ketogenic diet, are associated with poor nutrient quality. They're fiber deprived, they're nutrient deprived a lot of the time. And it's a high-fat diet. So you're getting more saturated fat, more cholesterol, which is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. And if you're someone who's struggling with being overweight or, with type 2 diabetes, that's a risk factor that you don't want to have added onto your plate. So I think it's really interesting to think about all of those different elements and not just focus on that short-term benefit of, oh, it might help me lower my A1C, or I might lose a little bit of weight, and really think about the long-term risks that it could pose.
Yeah, I love what you shared. Just being able to think about long term. And I think a lot of times, and I understand because I've even though I've never had diabetes before, but I understand the feeling of, okay, I just want to see the results now, right? Like I want to see the results now. And because we do care about the health, I think at the end of the day, like a lot of us do, we do anything that we can to get our blood sugar down. We do anything that we can to lose weight, right? But I think what's really, really amazing about a plant-based lifestyle is that you'll see results fairly quickly. And this is something that is sustainable and will be able to help you, increase your carbohydrate tolerance, will improve your blood lipid panel, will help you actually, improve different aspects of your health as well, right? Because a lot of times, with ketogenic lifestyle, it helps weight loss, it helps you lower blood glucose, but everything else, like it doesn't really help, right? It doesn't really help with inflammation, it doesn't really help with glucose tolerance, it doesn't really help with cholesterol, right? But I feel like with the plant-based lifestyle, it helps with all those different things as well. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. It's because, this is definitely something that is sustainable. It can, you won't feel deprived of carbohydrates. You will be able to lower your cholesterol, even in some cases reverse your fatty liver disease, lower your blood pressure, and really just do help with everything else. And that's why I am such a big advocate, and so is Galia, of this lifestyle as well. And for those of you who are listening, if you are interested in learning more about this reversing diabetes method, I encourage you to check out my free training on reversing type 2 diabetes and getting off diabetic medications while eating as much carbs as you want. The link will be in the show notes. And if you're also interested in working with us one-on-one, you can also book a call with us in the show notes. The link is in the show notes as well, and we'll be able to get on a call with you to see whether you're a great fit for our reversing diabetes program. Thank you so much for everyone that is still listening and is still invested in this. I hope that this gives you another light of why we recommend a whole plant-based diet and why we don't recommend a ketogenic diet. And hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys, everyone. Have a good one.